Okay, we're good.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I know it was a little bit of a difficult evening for a lot of folks last night. Hoping people got some sleep. I know it was tough in our house to kind of process what was happening, but I'm glad to be with all of you today to talk through what our plans are moving forward for this year. And I actually have a lot of updates to review. So I'm going to jump right in quickly. So as you know, we work with the health department. We have been since March. They've been meeting with us consistently on a weekly basis for quite some time. And as the knowledge about this virus has evolved, so has our understanding as superintendents, so has the health department's understanding, and it continues to be that way. So in the most recent meetings that we've been having, there's been a bit of a shift in terms of how we are looking at metrics in terms of returning to school. We've talked for a long time about incidence rates and positivity rates and community transmission. And all of those metrics continue to stand as pieces of the puzzle, as pieces of information that are helpful for us in our decision making. The shift that's happened in the last couple of weeks has to do with risk mitigation and how well or how consistently schools in particular are able to invest in and implement with fidelity and consistency mitigation efforts. And by those, I mean all of the things that we do when we are together in person. So mask wearing, hand sanitizing, self-certification, plexiglass shields, additional cleaning, the things that we've done in terms of prepackaging food, hallway markings, keeping people 6 feet apart is obviously the biggest one. So all of those pieces together lower the risk. There will never be, at least for a while, there will not be a zero risk anywhere that we are. But when we are together and we do all those things well, we definitely lower our risk. And so the health department has kind of moved towards a model where they look at sort of a risk stratified model, and the CDC has been there for a while, including risk mitigation strategies and implementation of those things as a metric. So there's the numbers surrounding the virus and the case counts and the community transmission numbers. And then there's also has been with regard to the CDC, this other sort of metric of whether or not organizations are able to afford and invest in and practice risk mitigation with consistency. And if an organization, and we're talking about schools in particular, if schools can do that well, then that is actually proven to lower risk. And we definitely saw that for a majority of the time that we've had students in since September 1st. And then we also felt at times when we saw staff shortages or when we saw more students going out, we also felt kind of a difference when those case counts rose and we saw the incidence rates rise. And so again, while we have all these mitigation pieces in place, we also have the numbers outside the community. We also have internal capacity issues, staffing issues. And so it continues to be a challenge and a balance of how well we do all these things, whether or not we can have folks back in school. So really quickly, I'm going to go to our dashboard. And in the next couple of weeks, this dashboard is going to change a little bit in terms of wording. So right now, the health department still has indicators of learning models there. You can see that this spike, this is where we were kind of around Thanksgiving when we decided to go remote for a while. So sorry. Hold on. It's remote learning at my house. There's 25 alarms set on my phone to remind kids when they have to get to class. So you can see we had that spike. We shifted to remote. We knew that we had families and staff that were traveling, and we did not gratefully see that spike continue. We actually saw our numbers decrease in the county. And when we were in person, our numbers were around here, and I'll shift to our zip code data here. This is kind of where we were when we were in person. We were kind of up and down, but hovering around this 25 per 100,000 case count. And now we are here with about 30. We're about at 30, 32. And again, the data, you know, we do what we can with this data. It's lagging sometimes, and that has to do with millions of data points being entered into these systems all the time, and the ability of the Illinois Department of Health and the Lake County Department of Health to get the cleanest, most reliable data. Because as we've talked about in the past, sometimes people register or find themselves putting their data in different counties, and it has to be cleaned and kind of moved to the place where it really belongs. So we monitor it really a lot to see what we can find. And sometimes there are lags in it and sometimes there are not. But we have definitely seen our numbers kind of decrease over the last month, which is good news. But we also know that, you know, we still have substantial community transmission. We still have folks who need to quarantine and isolate. We still have all those issues that we have to deal with. So as you know, I sent out a communication on New Year's Eve that, you know, we had planned on looking at 19th as a return date. Our numbers were going down. We weren't seeing those spikes. And the idea was that possibly we could think about bringing kids back a little early. We are, as I said in that communication, bringing our staff back as of January 11th. Our staff knows that they will be coming back to join us in person on the 11th. And so what we're going to be talking about today, and what I need your kind of feedback on, is a return date for students. Before I do that, I just want to give a couple of other updates. Vaccination is on everybody's mind, and certainly is on the health department's mind. We got some great news yesterday that our nurses can be vaccinated along with other healthcare workers, which is fantastic. They're registered in the system. They're waiting for their vaccinations now. They're in phase 1A. Our teachers and other staff that are working with any adult in the school are considered educators, and they are in phase 1B. Now, the vaccinations coming in are kind of still coming in a little bit randomly. There's really no schedule to the vaccination, the dosing that's coming in to the health department. So they're struggling with keeping up with that. But they have done tens of thousands of vaccinations already in Lake County, and they have assured us that there have been minimal side effects to the vaccinations, and everyone stays for about 15 to 30 minutes to be monitored for any sort of reaction. They've had one major allergic reaction, which was able to be taken care of with an EpiPen. So that's really good news. There were no long-term effects for that person. And they have implemented both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccinations. And, you know, when we as educators go to get our vaccinations, we will not have a choice. We'll take the one that is there. They both have the same efficacy. They both have the same types of side effects, which really are mostly just soreness at the injection site. And they both require the 2 doses. So either one that's available, we will be able to do that. And as a county, we're working on some closed pod vaccinations for educators in Lake County to be kind of streamlined through that process and have some good tracking with the 2 doses so that we can make sure everyone gets what they need. So we are working on that. As you also know, that regardless of when we bring students back, because we are still in a time of higher transmission, we are going to be implementing temperature checks for all of our students on campus. Those logistics are being worked out, and we will be talking to our teachers about how that's going to work when they come back on the 11th. We also, I also want to address one other piece, and that's one mitigation effort that we have not been doing, which is testing on campus. And I want to talk about that a little bit because, as you may or may not know, there are a couple of different types of tests. There are rapid antigen tests, and then there are PCR tests, which those are the ones that take a few days to get your results back. The rapid testing is a lot of what districts are doing, the rapid antigen testing. As a little bit of background, the antigen testing really is only recommended for use or can be accepted for use when a person is exhibiting symptoms. And then you can use the antigen test. But if a person is exhibiting COVID-like symptoms, which as we know, there's a lot of those, if they are exhibiting those symptoms and they receive a negative result from the antigen test, we cannot accept that because we have to presume that they are actually positive. And so the person who would take the antigen test with symptoms, get a negative result, would then have to be referred anyway to get a PCR test for confirmation. That's a lot of testing for folks to go through just to find out that, you know, you're negative here, but you wound up positive there. And it's a lot of work on our nursing staff and things like that. When our system for kind of having somebody go and get a PCR test if they have symptoms has been working for us, we know it's definitely some work, but it's one test as opposed to two. And then we have our answer and we know that that's right. Again, those antigen tests cannot be used for surveillance. If we were doing surveillance testing, in other words, testing everyone every day or once a week, we would have to have some different protocols for that. Because we would have to have exclusion type protocols. We would again have to be looking at if somebody has symptoms and show up negative on that surveillance test, we would have to ask them to go and get another one to confirm. So there's a lot of different protocols that would go along with testing here on campus. And we, as we know, our nurses, who I can see their faces right now, our nurses are already working really hard to maintain our health and safety protocols, just monitoring symptoms, putting, you know, bringing kids to isolation rooms, communicating with parents, communicating with the health department. So knowing that our vaccinations are close, our educators are in the next phase of vaccination, and we've been pretty successful with the model that we've been working with. We are not going to be investing the money and resources and time in testing on campus. So that I just wanted to put that out there as the only risk mitigation strategy that we are not putting into place here in Lake Bluff. There's been a lot of talk about travel. And I know that we have had families who have talked about traveling. We've had teachers who have traveled or, gathered with folks outside their homes. This is one thing that the health department's been pretty clear about for a couple of months. There's really no safe space. There's no place that is not experiencing transmission of COVID-19. And so it isn't where you travel, it's really what you're doing when you're traveling. And for that, as well as everything else, we are asking folks to just kind of think and reflect honestly about whether or not you've stayed 6 feet away, whether or not you've worn your masks, whether or not you've implemented some of those hand washing and 3W strategies that we've known for so long help us to minimize transmission of this virus. So we, no matter when we come back, we will be asking again for our community's partnership and just being honest about whether or not you have, been in a situation where you could have been exposed either here with folks outside your household or somewhere else with folks outside your household. There are safe ways to travel right now and just kind of stay with your bubble and go somewhere and continue to stay with your bubble and wear masks and do all those things. And there's also unsafe ways to stay at home. So again, we're kind of asking people to be honest and reflect upon how they have handled, travel and the holidays. And if you do feel like you've been in an unsafe situation, obviously, if they're experiencing any symptoms, we need you to quarantine and communicate with us. Okay, so let's talk about when we think we might be able to bring students back. So as we know, our staff are coming back on the 11th. We know that we are also bringing back and committed to bringing back all the students who want to be with us for trimester 2, which is additional students and sections and staffing for us. And we also know that we are responding to the sort of increased community transmission with another mitigation strategy that is temperature checks for our kids. So as an administrative team, we've been talking a little bit about what this transition back for our teachers will look like. And we feel like our teachers need a few days to be able to get back into the buildings, get their rooms set, become refreshed or get an introduction to new mitigation strategies and new processes and procedures that we're putting in place as we have more kids and we have additional processes that we're doing. So The idea that I'd like to put out to the group today for your feedback is a midweek start next week, either Wednesday or Thursday, to have students join us for a couple of days next week before our long weekend. As you know, that's Martin Luther King weekend. So we have next weekend, which is a 3-day weekend. So the idea is to give us kind of a soft start, a couple days with just our staff to get them feeling good and retrained and talking about those processes and procedures, and then have a few days with our kids, 2 or 3 days, and then our 3-day weekend, and then be able to start on the 19th for our first full week, which is really actually a 4-day week. So that's the idea that we have today to put out to staff and parents and board members and everyone who has stayed with us on this team. And I appreciate you so much. And I just want to remind everyone that all opinions, all information, all concerns are welcome here. This really is a collaborative group that we have leaned on since the beginning, and appreciate you joining us. And I'm going to open it up for your thoughts.
Lisa, if I may, one sort of request favor I might ask our families to consider and keep in mind. Certainly the spirit of this extended time at home after winter break, the spirit of it was to build in time for families who did gather outside of their immediate family to be home, self-quarantine, and then be ready to return to school in as safe a possible way. One of the things that I know is happening, and I'm not accusing here, I'm not being judgmental here, but what I know is we still have families that have also used this time to extend travel or visit and go somewhere, and maybe even not go anywhere, but perhaps engage in activities that may also still be considered risky. I would ask that families be honest about that and make a decision to keep kids home until they can come back and honestly self-certify. The experience that we have here is an interesting one, because there are always times where families will forget to do the self-certification. And when that happens, we then certify them at the door, which entails asking those questions that are on the self-certification form and taking a temperature. Part of that is asking if they've traveled. And I really want to encourage parents to not put their kids in a position where they're being forced either to be dishonest or share information that puts them in an uncomfortable spot. It happens. Have you traveled? Yes, I've traveled. Or no, I haven't. Or I'm self-certified and my mom told me not to. Kids love them. They can be very, very honest, and that's great. But it does make for some awkward conversations. And so I need for parents to understand that and really request that they not put their kids in that position. That's what I'm asking. That's awkward for the kids. That's awkward for staff, and it does not generate a feeling of trust and confidence in the processes that we have in place.
Thanks, Nate. I would say we have had some community members reach out with that same concern that maybe not everyone is going to be self-certifying honestly about travel and those kinds of things. And so it's not just a staff concern. It's also, I know, some of our community members. So it's important that we all make that commitment to each other. What other thoughts do we have at this point?
Kind of on what Nate was saying about how our kids are kind of.
Aaron, we're having a hard time. Sorry. Sometimes those earpods don't work that well, and I love them, but.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yep.
I know one of the things that kind of jumping off what Nate said is that we have kids that are very kind of honest and open in what they're doing. And I know our team has been feeling a little bit uncomfortable and uneasy, knowing that we have had kids share just as good news of all the places that they've been going or what they've been doing over winter break. And so I think that coming back before those 2 weeks and knowing that we still have had kids out traveling even as last week, like as early as last week, or even coming back this week. I think because they've decided to extend their travel, I think that midweek seems better to me than the 11th, but I think it would make a lot of teachers feel at ease knowing that we've given the 2-week grace period for parents that travel during those first 2 weeks.
Thanks, Erin.
I just had a question about the required quarantine length, because I feel like we need to clarify that a bit in what we're requiring, because I know it has changed. It was 14 days. Then I heard that it was 7 or 10. So I think that would be helpful just to clarify so that people can make sure they're doing the right thing.
Thanks, Vanessa. Actually, so there has been a lot of conversation back and forth on this issue. And because the CDC came out with a recommendation that there could be a 7 to 10 day quarantine that could be issued if a contact tracer felt like it was appropriate. That again was issued as a choice from the CDC down to state and local health departments. And our own health department, state and Lake County, have been talking about this issue and what they really feel like is appropriate. At this point, as of yesterday, the Lake County Health Department will not be advising anything less than a 14-day quarantine for close contact. Again, the travel situation is tough because there aren't any hotspots that are being identified. It really is about what you're doing wherever you are. And so if you've been a close contact with somebody, they will always be recommending a 14-day quarantine at this point. They're not taking advantage of that 7 to 10 days. I think that the 7 to 10 day quarantine issue came about, one, because the average length of time it takes for symptoms to show is 5 to 7 days. So we've known that for a little while. And the other issue is essential workers. And there have been, shortages in various areas around the country, and I'm sure around the globe, that have dealt with staffing shortages in emergency areas because of a 14-day quarantine, when people are still maybe asymptomatic at day 7 or 8. They've taken a negative, they've taken a PCR test, they're still negative. And those people, they feel like without symptoms and with a negative test around that time could probably safely come back to work if they're really needed. So I think, it came from a lot of different places, but as with all of these things with this situation, it's been evolving. We kind of hear what people think. We go back and forth. And then a lot of this is up to the local health departments and then school districts to decide how they're going to implement. But with the quarantine, we are still recommending, because Lake County is the 14-day quarantine if you've been a close contact or feel like you have been in an unsafe or risky situation. And again, our self-certification will not change. If you've taken a COVID test for any reason, you may not come to school until you have that result. Even if it's for, sometimes doctors are giving them for whatever reason before a procedure, there's no symptoms, but we ask that you stay out, because many times those tests come back positive and somebody did not have symptoms. And at that point, we would have to then do our contact tracing and have other people quarantine. Potentially.
I think the points that Erin and Vanessa just brought up are excellent points to consider. And here we are as a group that has been talking about these things for months now. And I feel like we're all pretty knowledgeable on what good mitigation practices are and what the community should be doing. But maybe just as we're going to come back and start the second semester again, maybe an additional, and I know people are getting tired of reading emails, but maybe just right before we come back, a review of, here's what the self-certification process is really asking. And, please try to answer those questions, as honestly as possible, just to protect staff and students and the community as a whole. And we're not being judgmental. We just, hey, we can work with you if we know what we're working with. So maybe just another reminder before we really bring all of our kiddos back in the building would be helpful.
Thanks, Kathy. And I agree with you. And that will definitely be a part of the communication. Just a reminder about all those pieces. Thanks.
I'll just jump in and tag on that a little bit. So, and I think just for the information of those watching and those on our task force, the piece that I'm thinking about a lot of things, of course, but we know when we return in person, we're not only bringing back all of our students that were here in November, we're also adding in additional students from families who requested to transition from remote to in-person. So here at LBES, we're talking about approximately 64 students. We've had some adjustments. So I think our actual number now is down a little bit from that. And so to Nurse Sullivan's point, we are working on communication to not only those families, but we thought it would be practical, purposeful, and really necessary to make sure that we're pointing out all of the protocols, the expectations, the guidelines, because for those 64 students, it's the first time they're coming in. So for those families, it's sort of like September 1st all over again. And we want to make sure that families are feeling prepared. Well, they are, for some, confident in their decision that shifting to in-person is what they want. There's still newness around those students coming to school. So I will share that the thought of coming back on the 11th because of the addition of those 64 students felt stressful. We can be ready for it. We know that we have been working around the clock throughout winter break to make sure that we have the things in place. And I recognize that's only a tiny sliver of this decision, but it is a lot to think about. All of our students coming back, plus the additional students and staff having been out. So to Lisa's point, really the need for our teachers to acclimate to the environment again. For some of them, they have been staying home and staying safe. And I'll say, having been out of the building for those 2 weeks, it was kind of strange to come back in when we returned after winter break. And so there's a lot of different feelings that surround that. I think that I'd love to hear from more members of this team just around the idea of, is a midweek start something that we would be okay with? Or do we, definitely from a few we've heard, let's stay the course and come back on the 19th. I can say that we'll be ready, whatever the decision is, but the more time to just make sure everyone has information, they're confident in their plans, they know what to do when they get here. Those are the pieces logistically that I have been thinking about, and I thought it would be helpful for the team to be aware of that.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly, too. I was thinking also about some stuff that I feel like still needs to be planned out, like the mask breaks and just the anxiety about that and wanting to make sure we're all set for that. And then just a lot of questions about like, how is the temperature check going to happen and what is the flow and things like that, that I just feel like, I don't know. I mean, I know we had talked about just like a small group coming in, like, you know, maybe a grade level, and like we test some stuff out. I don't know if we want to do that. It's probably not feasible because of siblings and things like that. But it just feels, there's just anxiety for me just about some stuff, like those little logistic things that I'm like, okay, how is that happening? Are teachers out there taking temperatures? Like just some of that stuff that I feel like, you know, it would be helpful for those people in, you know, who is here to know like how is that going to flow and look like.
Thanks, Paige. And those are things that we will address and we've been talking about. So good questions for sure. Thank you.
If I may, I want to add just a little bit to something Kelly's mentioned, and the same is true here, right? We've grown in the number of in-person students that we'll be servicing at the elementary or at the middle school. We've picked up about an additional 25 overall who are requesting in-person instruction. Now, more that had been doing 5 days had also requested a hybrid option. So while we have more kids coming in, the individual kids that will be here on a day-to-day basis remains roughly the same as it was during trimester one. But the thing that will be coming from us here in the next today or tomorrow, or early tomorrow at the latest, would be communication, particularly with those families who have either shifted from fully remote or fully in person to some sort of hybrid model, to look at advisory placement. I think is important for people to understand that our advisors have been assigned either to groups of students that are fully remote or in person. And so if somebody who is moving to a hybrid model had been fully remote, it's likely that they'll be assigned to a new in-person advisor. But at the same time, in order to maintain continuity, we have developed a process by which our advisors are paired together, both a remote advisor and an in-person advisor. So even if there is an advisor switch, it does not mean they're abandoning the advisor that they were with initially. They will still be working with that person when they are fully remote. We'll send letter home to explain all of that. But to Kelly's point, there are a lot of logistics involved in bringing students back to the building, and we'll be ready whenever that is. But it's something that parents need to be aware of, and I just want to thank them in advance for their understanding and flexibility. There's a lot that goes into making sure that our spaces are adhering to the requirements. That 6-foot distancing piece is the big one. We know that. So just wanted to dovetail on what Kelly mentioned already about the assignments.
Thanks, Nate. That brings up another thought for me that I do want to emphasize that we haven't talked about a lot. One thing that our administrative team has tried really hard to work on is to maintain fidelity of programming for our students who have decided to stay remote as well. So as we make these transitions from fully remote to partially in person, what we've tried to work out is as seamless a transition for the students who are not changing programs. They've decided to continue to stay remote, which I know is not a comfortable choice for all of our parents necessarily, but they're doing that because of various reasons. And we want to make sure that we maintain continuity for them as much as possible. The way we do that is to try to support our teachers as best we can to make sure they're feeling comfortable with how this model is going to change. One thing that I'm very, very proud of is that we have, and by we, I mean our teachers and administrators have worked really hard to create a seamless situation where students can be in or out for any length of time. And that is not always the case in every district this year. So I am very, very proud that we've worked hard to make that happen. But just know it's sort of like the duck that's on the water. It's calm on the surface, but underneath, there's a lot of work to make that as seamless as possible. And so I think that's what our teachers and administrators are alluding to right now, is that in order to make it that seamless, there's a lot of little details that need to be taken care of. And again, we want to take care of all of our kids in this process.
So to your point earlier, Dr. Leali, about, I know community members being concerned as well, with kids coming back into school. I know that's something I've heard a lot about this week, as I communicated to you earlier. And I love the thought about delaying to midweek. And I say this as a parent too, as someone who has kids coming back into the building. I also want to remind that the original date was the 19th. And I guess I love the comments that everyone is saying that we'll be ready whenever. And I have no doubt that's true. But I guess what I'd love to know is what do you, as the administration and teachers, what do you think is actually better? I mean, at this point, does it make sense to, I'm just asking a question, I don't know the answer, obviously. I'm just wondering, does it make sense to really try to push when we know people are still out, still traveling, still doing stuff, to try to come back midweek? Or does it make just sense to push to the 19th, which was the original plan? I'm just throwing that out there. I'd love to know what people really truly think is better in that regard, as opposed to just knowing you could be ready for either.
Thanks for the question, Andy. I appreciate it. I'll put my 2 cents out there and say I see pros and cons to both. And I'm going to let teachers talk after this, because they're the ones that are really impacted by this. The pro that I see to a midweek start is giving us a little bit of time together and then a nice long weekend to kind of step back and make any adjustments we need to make. The pro I see to waiting until the 19th is just more time. More time for us to get settled and ready, more time for people to quarantine and make sure they're prepared. So I see pros to both. Obviously, there's cons on the opposite end of those. So I'm going to leave it as those are my opinions right now and the reason that I brought that to the table. But I'm going to let it out there for anyone else who wants to put their opinions out.
I agree that we will be ready for anything because you guys have really been planning and working. I know the administrative team has just been, working overtime on all the protocols being in place. I do think that there is some comfort to parents knowing that like, this is the day we're coming in, and so just having that, like, we know we're going to be on this day instead of a change of plan. And I think that something to consider is that just even in the last couple of days, there's been an uptick. And then, that would just give a little time for that to maybe even out and maybe start to drop again instead of going up. That might provide some comfort to not only families, but to staff coming into the building.
Thanks, Ann.
Some of my colleagues on the team will know that I'm a fan of analogies and metaphors, and the one that comes to mind as a football fan that watches a lot of football, if we're like in this play is under further review and the referee goes and looks at it, I think the ruling, like my thought is like the ruling on the field stands as called. It's not confirmed that it's the 19th is the best decision. It's not necessarily there's irrefutable evidence maybe one way or another. I think it's the date we set, and that's kind of my gut feeling is we've set that date. I think people have kind of got comfort in it, but at the same time I see so many and hear so many students and families kind of longing for connection and being in the building and getting things going, and kind of the lead into that. I think there's value too with starting on I think coming back from a paternity leave with my daughter who's made a couple appearances, I came back on a Thursday and it was really refreshing to be in for 2 days. You had a weekend to regroup, and then you start off on a full week being back in the building. And so I can see both ways, kind of leaving it standing as called, whether it was, that's the best day or not. But I also see starting for a day or so just to kind of get the flow back going.
Thanks, Joe. And we are all looking forward to your COVID book of analogies when this is all over, because I believe there's a book in there. I love them.
I had a quick opinion and question. My first one was on the self-certification. Is there any movement on the app that we are supposedly going to have to make it a little bit easier for self-certification? And then my 2 cents would just be consistency. So we said the 18th or the 19th because it was a good date, and then we're going to look at the numbers. So maybe we just keep it with not as much comfort, because we're only going to know when we go how all the metrics are going to work for temperature checks and people in the building. So maybe we just keep it at the numbers of the county are looking good, therefore we're coming back, because otherwise it's just going to be another week or maybe another 2 weeks before the numbers go up again, and then we're going to be sent home.
So I'm going to address both, but Carrie, I want to make sure I understand. Are you thinking keep it the 19th or just come back on next week?
Well, people know where I live, so I don't want to say my true opinion. But no, as much as I want my kids back like 3 years ago, right? So they're begging to go back. So 3 days would be great. But then 3 days is again more time as well. So I guess I'm fine with either. I want them to go back. I want it to be a secured date where it's like, okay, the numbers are down, so we'll be able to do this for an extended period of time, versus just 3 days and then the numbers are spiking so much that we have to stay home then for another week or more. Does that make sense?
Carrie, that does make sense. And it brings up another point for me. So I'm going to answer your first question first. So we did pursue the app. Unfortunately, a lot of these apps for self-certification were created quickly because of this crisis. And we had a lot of trouble with setting it up and getting it to be a seamless process. And as a team, we kind of decided about a month ago that what we have is working, and we have a system for doing it. It's a little bit more work on our end too. And we know it's a little bit of work for parents, but we've kind of gotten a flow to that. And we feel like trying to train people on a new app right now in the middle of everything else might not be the best use of our time. So I appreciate you remembering that, because that was part of the plan, but unfortunately, technology, it's like, it answers one question and then brings up a couple more. To your other point about how consistently can we do this? I do want to emphasize that one of our goals coming back, which thank you for reminding me, is to try to be a little bit more situational in our response. So what we have talked about it as an administrative team is to avoid a full-scale closure, to avoid bigger closures if we can go with smaller closures. So in other words, if we have a staffing shortage, to go ahead and shift a small portion remote because of that staffing shortage, as opposed to having the whole building shift or the whole district. So there might come a time when we'll need to do it, but our focus is on being a little bit more discreet with our decision making and trying to do some shifting so that smaller populations are impacted, as small population as possible. So I hope that puts a little bit, puts that in a little bit more perspective.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
So I've bounced back and forth a little bit in terms of my thinking of when I think a good return date would be, whether that's to move it up or to keep it the 19th. I see some advantages to both of them, like people said. So one thought that I had initially was, well, we've got some new students coming in. What if the new students coming in are the ones that come in early so that they can sort of get used to and acclimated to the processes, the procedures in the building? But then as I'm thinking about it, if that's 30 kids at the middle school, we have 3 grade levels, 3 rooms per grade level. That means there's going to be like 3 new kids in my room. And so then I don't know if that's necessarily as advantageous as it seemed in my mind initially. So now I'm back to, I just don't really know whether it should be, this is the date we set. Let's make sure we're prepared for it and do it on this date. Or this is the date that we can start to sort of try some of these things with maybe a smaller group. But it's such a small group, maybe it's not that helpful. So again, not a whole lot of help there, but those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate you putting your thoughts out. And I do want to just remind folks that we will have a small group of students in the buildings. We have this week a small group in. We've had one since we even shifted to remote. We have students with special circumstances who really, really needed the support. And so it's a very small group in each building, but it's there. And so there are some students, if we were to take that idea of like, let's practice, there are some folks, some students in the buildings, although they've been with us the whole time. So they are very, very comfortable with our processes at this point.
I just kind of want to piggyback off of Brian in that, I'm torn too, but I just to kind of help people sort it out too, I'd like to just share a few perspective. I have a lot of teachers telling me that they're struggling to get their students to engage, that especially with like our younger learners, trying to teach them over Zoom and manage that has been very difficult. I've had a lot of parents calling, explaining just how their children are struggling to, again, engage and stay focused, and the juggling between trying to, some of them working or managing multiple kids in their home. I've had a lot of people calling and begging to come in, getting their own children in, or having students brought in because they're just so concerned about every level, academic, emotional, things like that. So there's been a lot of needs that have come about with that. And I know sometimes people think that bringing them in school is going to, maybe help the situation. But it's just tough either way. So there's just a lot of things to kind of think about. I also see a lot of anxious teachers who are coming into the building, some of them for the very first time. And a lot of this is very new. And our teachers who were here in the fall kind of experienced that. And then they kind of started getting going and they felt okay. And, I think about them, like, is there going to be more anxiety building for them over that weekend? Unless, if we brought the kids back, would they just kind of feel a little bit more at peace going into that weekend, knowing like, okay, we did this. And then the other piece is just like the logistical things. If we get a couple of days under our belts, that gives us some additional time to kind of adjust and pivot and work some of those kinks out, so that when we come back again, it'll be ready. So I'm torn. I can go either way. But just wanted to give that food for thought.
Thanks, Audrey.
I'm gonna piggyback kind of off of what Audrey said. I have mixed feelings as a parent and a teacher. First, teaching remote is not an ideal situation that any of us want to be in, and we want our kids back as much as soon as possible and in the building as much as we can. I want that for my own kid and for the students in my class. Speaking for the other teachers, I think that it coming back before that quarantine period, I think that gave teachers some helped take away some of that anxiety. And I think that, you know, this year has been stressful and different altogether, and we have been doing a great job trying to meet the needs of all of our kids. And I think that sometimes the anxiety and things can affect the way that we're teaching and able to do our jobs. And this is kind of a situation where we can't control it, and it's harder to know how things are going to make you feel at different times. So I know from speaking to other members of my team and on other teams that it just is a feeling of relief knowing that like we did our part of keeping those 2 weeks and feeling more comfortable coming back on the 19th. I know that before we went on break, knowing that that was going to possibly be our date was for some of my teammates and others gave us the ability to do a little bit more relaxing over break and not having to worry as much about what others were doing over winter break. So as much as we want the kids back in the building as much as possible and as soon as possible, I think there's also some anxiety with making sure that we're doing it safely, not only for us and for our families, but also for the kids.
Thanks, Erin.
I think sorry, go ahead.
Thanks, Kelly. I think that everybody's kind of saying a lot of the same thing. And I think there's always on our end as teachers and administrators and parents too, I think there's always going to be some anxiety and nervousness about this situation, right? Like we just don't know. So I think that we bring that with us every day, and that's hard, but we also come here and need to do what's best for the kids, and everybody's trying to do that. I think that as a teacher, I know it's helpful for that time. We've said it before. I think in the fall, I feel like we had more time to come and just to be in the building and get adjusted. And like we said, we've been away and we need to come back and do it again. I came to school Monday and totally forgot to put my mask on. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? I totally forgot because I was used to being home without a mask. So it seems silly, but there are many layers to being here and doing this. And I think we need to respect that and give the teachers and the adults just time to get back into it and prepare for all that is coming in and the new and the people who haven't been here. I just think that the best thing is to give us that time, and we'll be ready to go on the 19th and welcome those kids, and it'll just ease a lot of anxiety for everybody. That's just what I'm hearing, I feel like, from a lot of people, even just today. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Michelle.
And I thought I might just be brave and take a stance because I do agree with all of the pros and cons put out there. It's definitely on my mind, but I'm going to lean towards echoing what Michelle has said, just to have an opinion. I do think going back on the 19th, I think about how, and we can't, every scenario, each day is different around here. Information changes. I know that it was a huge relief at the start of the year when we pushed our start date back to September 1st. And I think that upon reflection, that was a brilliant decision. I think there are a lot of brilliant decisions that we've made. I think that, you know, I'm creating a list as Joe is making a book of analogies, mine or metaphors. Mine is really like words that I never want to use again, things like pivot. And so I think if we don't need to be in a situation where we feel rushed or anxious, if we do have any control over that, again, just being brave right now and taking a stance. If we are to return on the 19th, I think while we know everyone is urgent to get back, there is a different level of calm that we may re-enter with, or at least a little bit of an element of calm if we can create it. And so just putting that out there. And Carrie, people may know where I live too. So I'm just, I think that was a funny comment, but yeah.
Also
So
a parent.
they know where my office is. So just weighing in. Thanks, everybody.
Can I just add one more thing? I'm sorry. I just want to say, like, as a parent, and many of us are parents, Dr. Leali, you included, whose kids have not been in school. And I got an email, we were supposed to be back the 18th, and that's not happening. And it's very disappointing. And I think about how lucky we are here. For those that are coming and need to be in, we've done it. So we were successful. We worked hard. We were here and did it safely and did a good job. And we are doing it again. Like we may need a little more time logistically to get what staffing and rooms and whatever, but we do have a date and we are doing it again. And I don't want to forget that we are there. Like, so even if it's a few more days and it's the 19th and it's disappointing, as much as we want to be with the kids and the parents want the kids here, they're coming. And they'll be here and we're excited. And I'm excited to be here. And I'm excited for those kids. And I'm sad for my kids at home. So I just don't want to forget that we are coming. And it's very exciting.
Thank you, Michelle. And as you might imagine, Michelle and I maybe have had some conversations about how our kids could use some in-person time. Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, I'll say for my 3 who haven't been in a building to attend school yet, I'm agreeing, right? I have the same feeling. And so, Kelly, thank you for being brave and chiming in. I feel as though I should do the same. Here's what I'm going to say. Regardless of when we bring kids back, it's not normal school. They're not coming back to an environment where all of a sudden they're traveling class to class and they're having FaceTime with their kid, with their teachers, and they're interacting socially with their peers, and they're having a normal experience. They aren't. And here at the middle school, for the most part, they're having the exact same experience that they're having at home. They're in a room, they're on a computer, they're on Zoom, and they're doing much the same thing. And I want to remind everybody of that, because to me, that's where my comfort lies in suggesting that returning on the 19th may in fact make the most sense. Because I have to ask, what do we gain by bringing them back 3 days early? We bring them back to a school environment that looks nothing like we want it to look like. I want to be very clear about that. I know there's a lot of things being written and being said about teachers and their concerns. No, we have teachers in this building who every single day are mourning the loss of a normal experience with their students. That goes without saying, and I want to be very, very clear about it. We want them back in the building. Unfortunately, there are requirements that have been put in place that prohibit us from doing that in the normal way. So, for me, knowing what in fact we'd be bringing kids back and implementing for them that is in person, that's where my level of comfort is in saying, go ahead, let's wait till the 19th. Again, we'll be ready if we do it earlier than that. But it isn't as though we're bringing them back to some sort of normalcy, because it's the normal that we are experiencing this year that is very different.
Thanks, Nate. Any other thoughts before we adjourn? Because we've gone a little bit over time. We've gone a little bit more than a little bit over time, but that's okay. We needed the time to talk today.
I could hear kind of the anxiety ramping up as the meeting continued. And it's rightfully so, because if you haven't been in the building for a while, you don't know what does the day look like, anymore, and how are we going to do this, and how are we going to keep our mitigation practices going and everybody safe. And I would just like to say, for those of us who have been here every day with our small group of kids, it's going to be okay. Things come up, but those of us, again, who've been here, we've kind of got some tools in our toolbox now, and maybe you get thrown a curve every once in a while, but I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was safe. So I've been coming in every day. We work through it. I know it's easier for me to say, but once you dip your toe in the water and then you get a little more comfortable, if this helps, with your fear of the unknown at all, it'll be okay. We've got a good plan in place. So,
Thank you, Kathy.
sure.
Okay, folks, we're going to wrap this up on that. And what I'm hearing is that we feel like the date that was given is the date that people have been thinking about, and the date that gives people comfort and feels like the call on the field. And we need to stay with that and bring people back on the 19th after our long weekend. I appreciate, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this group. It does take bravery and courage to put your opinions out there. As you know, these are all recorded. They are viewed by a lot of folks. And these YouTube videos have gotten lots of views for a reason. These are important discussions. You've been an important part of this process, every single one of you. There's a question in the chat about students with IEPs and 504s coming into the building next week. I would encourage any parent that feels like they need some additional support next week or has any concerns to contact your principal and talk that through. But at this point, what I'm feeling like is we're going to go with a full return for all the students trimester 2 on the 19th as we have planned. Again, with the idea that we will be looking to, if we encounter, which we probably will, staffing issues or case counts or things, that we will try to be very discreet in our decision making, close the smallest or shift the smallest amount of students to remote that we need to, and work through it for as long as we possibly can. I appreciate the community members who've been on this team. I can appreciate our board members coming and being here every time. Teachers, I appreciate you. I hope you know that I appreciate you. We all appreciate everything that you're doing. Kathy, Kelly, Jennifer, our nurses, can't really say. We couldn't be able to do this, wouldn't be able to do any of what we do without you. And obviously our administrative team is top notch. So again, I appreciate everyone's participation. I really did not know how this meeting was going to go, and all the opinions are very, very valued. And I appreciate you being here and sharing. So as always, feel free to call or email if you think of something or had something to say that you weren't comfortable saying. That's okay too. Let us know. Anyone on the administrative team would be happy to take those thoughts or feedback. And my communication will come out this afternoon to staff and community. So again, thanks so much. I know this is a tough start to 21. I still feel optimistic about what's coming for us in the future. And whatever it is, good, bad, we'll work through it together. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.